mingling of charred pine, cold metal, and something far older, something that clung to the soil like an old sorrow. It rose from the blackened cabin timbers in thin serpents of smoke, whispering of the violence that had visited this clearing only hours before. The door hung open, half splintered. Near the threshold lay a single brass cartridge, polished clean on one side as if it had been gripped too tightly in a trembling hand. Someone had placed it deliberately atop a folded scrap of paper. The wind lifted the corner just long enough for the deputy to glimpse the words written in a careful, almost reverent hand. Ode in blood. Beyond the cabin, the forest was still, too still. Even the cicadas stayed silent, as though the entire stretch of Tennessee woods was holding its breath around the ruin of a man's home. 27 sets of boot prints circled the clearing, carelessly stamped but unmistakable in their intent. The Nightriders had come in force, and the man they hunted was no ordinary target. He was a Union veteran, a decorated marksman whose quiet existence in these hills had long unsettled men who preferred their legends buried rather than breathing. The deputy crouched beside the cartridge. It was .52 caliber, the kind once spat from the breech of a Sharps rifle, an artifact of the war 10 years behind them, yet somehow fresher than the ashes at his feet. Whoever left it wanted the world to remember the man who had fired it, or to fear him. This was not a random act of vengeance. It was a message, a warning, a reckoning. What followed would embroil a county already stained with unsolved disappearances, unreported burials, and whispered alliances among families whose influence reached far beyond their church pews. Before we continue with the story of the night 27 Nightriders surrounded the cabin of America's most decorated Black Union sniper, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. To understand what happened in those woods, we must return to the uneasy decade after the Civil War, when victory promised freedom but delivered something far more complicated. The year was 1875, and the western edge of Tennessee lay suspended between hope and dread. Reconstruction laws might have been inked in Washington, but out here, miles from railroads, tucked among rolling fields of cotton and tobacco, they were as fragile as the paper they were written on. The town smelled of river mud, lamp oil, and tannery smoke. On Sundays, church bells tolled across valleys where freedmen built small cabins near the creeks, planting corn in tight rows and whispering hymns carried from one generation to the next. Many veterans, black and white, returned home carrying all wounds the eye couldn't see. Some sought quiet, others sought revenge. All moved through a land trying to pretend it had healed. The main road through Hardeman County wound past weatherboard churches, abandoned Confederate outposts reclaimed by vines, and farms run by families who refused to accept the new order. A traveler might hear the rhythmic ring of a blacksmith's hammer or the laughter of children playing in streams. But beneath these everyday sounds simmered a tension so constant it felt like a hum in the air. Freedmen working their modest plots kept a watchful eye on the tree line at dusk. Sharecroppers whispered that certain hills were best avoided after sundown. Night brought with it the unsettled, the unsatisfied, the armed. Though the war had ended, the secret societies that rose in its ashes had not. The Nightriders were among the most feared, men who wanted no witness left alive, no court summoned, no newspaper ink to dilute their message. They moved like a single body, faces hidden beneath flour sacks or torn cloth, horses muffled to pass through the woods like phantoms. Their visits were usually swift. A burned barn, a whipping, a disappearance. But when they learned that a decorated Black Union soldier had settled alone in the hills, one rumored to have sent dozens of Confederate officers to their graves with a single shot, they saw an opportunity to reclaim something they felt the war had stolen from them. The veteran's name, whispered differently depending on who spoke it in, It drifted through the county long before the fire. Children repeated stories overheard through cabin walls. Pastors warned their flock to avoid gossip, even as their own voices trembled when the name slipped from their lips. Some spoke of him with awe, others with hatred, and some with a mixture that hinted at fear. "Man like that ought not live alone out there," one shopkeeper muttered to another as they swept dust from their storefront. "Ain't natural. A man who waits and watches the woods the way he does, always listening, always measuring men when they walk past." "Maybe he's earned the right," the other replied, lowering his voice. "Fought for the Union. Some say he saved a whole regiment with that rifle of his." The shopkeeper spat into the dirt. "Or damned it, dependin' who you ask." Stories traveled further than truth in those days, carried along wagon roads under the hot Tennessee sun. Some said the veteran never missed a target, that even in pitch dark he could sense a man's heartbeat before he fired. Others claimed he kept a journal filled with names of men he vowed would never harm another freedman. Whether these were inventions or memories twisted by fear hardly mattered. In an era where rumor was as sharp as any blade, his reputation alone was enough to draw enemies. Evenings in the town square revealed another layer of the county's divided spirit. Lanterns glowed faintly against the clapboard walls as white families exchanged polite words during the cooler hours. But below the surface simmered resentment. They saw their world shifting. Freedmen forming churches, buying small parcels of land, voting. Change was slow, but visible, and visibility bred fury in men who wanted the world to return to its old shape. In the freedmen's settlements, life pulsed with cautious optimism. Women hung quilts patterned with coded histories from their porches. Men repaired fences and told children to stay close after sunset. On warm nights, laughter drifted from communal gatherings, songs sung softly around fire pits, stories told to keep ancestral memory alive. Yet, even in celebration, eyes often flicked toward the shadows. Freedom had come, yes. Safety had not. The river that wound through the county served as both lifeline and silent witness. Barges carried goods to Memphis, leaving locals with the news of distant cities, economic shifts, new laws debated in far-off chambers, occasional mentions of Union veterans who had been honored or forgotten. But here along the muddy banks, the river heard things no newspaper ever printed. Confessions spoken to drifting reeds, arguments over debts old and new, secret meetings at moonrise where men plotted the next night's ride. There was a particular chill in the air that autumn, an early frost that killed the last of the summer blooms and crept into homes through cracks in the floorboards. Farmers spoke of it as a bad omen, though few agreed on what it foretold. Cows grew restless, refusing to settle at dusk. Dogs barked at empty fields. And on more than one occasion, travelers reported seeing torchlight moving silently along distant ridges, vanishing before anyone could follow. By the time the Nightriders' intent became undeniable, the veteran had already felt the shift. Neighbors later recalled seeing him walk the edge of his property at twilight, pausing every few steps to press his hand against the trunk of a tree or crouch beside a narrow animal trail. One recalled him whispering, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the spirits of the land, "They're coming. I just don't know when." America, in 1875, was a nation trying desperately to stitch itself back together. But in Hardeman County, where grudges survived longer than crops, the stitch unraveled faster than anyone could mend it. The frost deepened as October crept across the hills, settling over Hardeman County like a thin shroud. Before long, even the oldest residents, men who had weathered war, famine, and the restless haunts of memory, began to remark that something in the land felt wrong. It wasn't just the cold. It was the way the nights lengthened unnaturally, how shadows pooled thicker under the elms, how the wind sometimes carried a distant metallic echo, as though a rifle bolt were being drawn back in the dark. Down in the town, The blacksmith named Tremel Reeves told anyone who'd listen that he'd seen horsemen riding without lanterns along the ridge after midnight. "They move too smooth," he insisted to a pair of farmers as he hammered a shoe flat on his anvil. Didn't speak, didn't stop, like they already knew where they was headed. One of the farmers shifted uneasily. "Could be traders trying to make Memphis before sunrise." Reeves shook his head. "Traders don't ride with sacks over their faces." That comment earned him a sharp look. In Hardeman County, some truths were safer left unspoken. Men lowered their voices not out of politeness, but out of fear of who might be listening. Farther out in the settlements, freedmen noticed that the forest paths they used for gathering firewood had begun to change. Twigs snapped beneath feet that were not their own. Saplings bent as if brushed aside by unseen riders. Even the birds seemed to avoid certain gullies, and at night dogs tethered outside cabins growled toward the same stretch of trees again and again, as if something lingered just beyond the reach of torchlight. There were whispers, too, barely rumors, more like scraps of conversation overheard in passing. A mother shushing her children after one claimed to see white faces floating in the trees. A traveling preacher telling a congregation that the devil often moved behind men who wear masks, not horns. A shopkeeper insisting he'd heard someone tapping at his door long past midnight, though no tracks appeared in the morning frost. The sheriff said little publicly, but he rode with a tension that showed in his shoulders. Once, a young boy overheard him mutter outside the jailhouse, "Lord help us. If they're gathering again, it'll be worse this time." When asked who they were, he pretended not to hear. The veteran's presence, quiet, observant, and unbothered by the growing fear around him, seemed to amplify all of it. His cabin sat alone on a slope surrounded by tall pines, each creaking under the cold like old bones shifting. Though he rarely came into town, when he did, he walked with the controlled stillness of someone who had learned to measure every movement during a time when a wrong step meant death. His coat was worn, his boots polished exactly once a month, his rifle always wrapped carefully in a canvas sleeve he carried over one shoulder. Men watched him from porches, pretending not to. Women paused conversations mid-sentence until he passed. Even the children quieted around him, not in fear exactly, but in something closer to reverence. One evening outside the general store, an older white man with a whiskey bottle in his hand spat at the veteran's feet and muttered, "Ought to hang that man's rifle over the courthouse door. Only place a Union gun belongs." The veteran paused, looked at him, and replied in a calm, low voice, "You'd have to get it from me first." The simplicity of the statement unnerved everyone within earshot. Not because it was a threat, but because it wasn't. It was simply true. The war had carved into him a patience others mistook for coldness, but beneath that stillness lay something harder to read, something shaped by years of waiting in the undergrowth for an enemy to emerge, by nights spent listening for the faintest crack of a twig, before raising the rifle that had made him a legend and a target. In many ways, he embodied the contradiction of America in 1875. Free, but hunted. Respected, but feared. A survivor of a conflict that had promised justice, but left entire counties caught between the living and the ghosts. By the time the leaves turned brittle and brown, the county's fragile peace had become a rumbling tension. Families hurried home earlier. Church gatherings ended before twilight. Travelers carried extra matches for torches. Every man, woman, and child felt the shift in the air, even before the hoofbeats were heard. And when the night finally came, when 27 riders blotted out the moon with their torches and their masks, when the pines crackled under the heat of the first thrown flame, every warning, every whisper, every shiver in the dark, suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. The first man whose life bent irrevocably toward the coming violence was the veteran himself, known in Army records as Corporal Isaiah Turner, though few in Hardeman County ever dared speak his full name aloud. Most simply called him Turner, as if brevity might shield them from the gravity carried by a man who had once moved through the shadows of war like a quiet, watching spirit. Turner stood a little over 6 feet, with a frame carved by years of marching, stalking, and surviving. His face bore the angular austerity of a man who had lived too long under open skies. High cheekbones, deep-set eyes the color of river silt, and a beard grayed prematurely from hardship. There was something immovable in the way he held himself. Shoulders always square, gaze always steady, breath always measured. Like a man who had learned to make peace with danger simply because it had so often been his only companion. Neighbors who passed him on the road noted that he walked as though expecting the earth to shift beneath his feet at any moment. One freedman, Elias Ward, once said, "Brother Turner's got a stillness to him. Not the kind that comes from peace. The kind that comes from watching too many men die." Turner had never denied it. His cabin life reflected the same disciplined order he had learned on battlefields stretching from Shiloh to Nashville. Inside, everything had its place. The rifle he carried, an 1859 Sharps, polished but battered, rested against a handmade rack above his small table. A single Bible lay beside a tin lamp. A pair of boots sat beside the hearth, always cleaned, always ready. On the mantel, tucked beneath a folded scrap of blue uniform cloth, he kept a tarnished medal awarded for marksmanship. Turner never spoke of it, though some evenings, when the fire dimmed and shadows stretched across his walls, he would touch the medal with 2 fingers, as if reminding himself that the man he had been still held some claim on the man he had become. Turner distrusted crowds, but children he treated with a quiet gentleness that surprised even him. Once, when a young boy wandered too close to a snapping snare line Turner was resetting, he raised his voice, one of the few times he ever did. "Stop right there," he said, sharp as a rifle crack. "That wire'll break your hand clean if you ain't careful." The boy froze, wide-eyed. Turner knelt beside him, easing his tone. "You walk these woods, you learn to listen. They talk to you, tell you where danger sleeps. Understand?" "Yes, sir," the boy whispered. "Good. Now head home before your mama thinks the forest swallowed you." For all his kindness in rare moments, most people sensed a deeper fear beneath his calm, something unspoken. Some nights neighbors claimed they saw him sitting on his porch long after midnight, rifle across his lap, watching the tree line like a man expecting old ghosts to return. And perhaps he was. For though Turner had tried to bury the horrors of war beneath the rhythms of cabin life, the land had a way of unearthing the things men hoped to forget. The second figure whose fate intertwined with Turner's was Deputy Silas Greeley, the man who found the cartridge on the threshold of the burned cabin. Greeley was younger than Turner, barely 30, with sandy hair and a nervous energy that never quite settled. He had grown up in Hardeman County, the son of a tailor who mended uniforms for both sides during the war, a fact that ensured the elder Greeley never spoke loudly of politics again. Silas carried the conflicting weight of a man sworn to uphold the law in a county where law bowed easily to the whims of powerful families. He was earnest, too earnest for most townsfolk, who preferred their deputies obedient rather than idealistic. His pale blue eyes always seemed to be searching for answers, though he rarely liked the ones he found. The sheriff often warned him, "Silas, you keep poking into things. One day you'll find something you can't put back." Greeley had once replied, "If something's happening in these woods, Sheriff, don't we owe it to folks to know what it is?" "Oh," the sheriff muttered. "Son, you owe this county your silence more than your questions." Silas knew the sheriff wasn't wrong, not in the practical sense, but he felt the tightening of fear in the air the way others felt a storm coming. He saw mothers clutching children a little closer at dusk, heard the conversations that stopped abruptly when masked riders were mentioned. He noticed when the same men visited the same barns late at night, the barns belonging to families whose sons had been ridden with secret bands since the war. Greeley feared many things, disappointing his father, angering the sheriff, uncovering truths that could get him killed. But most of all, he feared losing his sense of right and wrong in a place where morality shifted like river mud. Still, there was one man he admired without hesitation: Isaiah Turner. Years earlier, Greeley had seen Turner sitting alone outside the general store, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Greeley, still new to the badge then, had approached with polite caution. "You were with the Union Sharpshooters, weren't you?" he asked. Turner didn't look up. "Some say so. War's long past now. Folks forget things." Turner paused, lifted his gaze. "Forgetting ain't always a virtue, Deputy." Greeley swallowed. "Do you ever regret it?" Turner's answer was a whisper, barely audible over the rasp of steel. "I regret the reasons men gave me to aim." From that day on, Silas considered Turner one of the few souls in the county whose conscience hadn't been swallowed whole by bitterness. The third person intertwined in this story, though she did not yet know how deeply, was a school teacher named Marianne Caldwell. She had arrived from Nashville 2 years prior, hired by the Freedmen's Bureau to teach reading, arithmetic, and scripture to children whose parents had been denied such knowledge all their lives. Marianne was 26, with dark hair pinned tightly at the back of her head, and a voice gentle enough to calm frightened children but strong enough to silence a room of bickering adults. Her presence stirred mixed reactions. Some white families saw her as an intruder, a northern-minded idealist meddling in matters that weren't hers. Others tolerated her politely. Freedmen welcomed her, though with caution. Help offered freely in 1875 often came with unseen strings. Marianne spent her evenings reading by lamplight in the small schoolhouse cabin, often listening to the distant rumble of hooves as riders passed in the night. She was not naive. She had heard of night patrols long before she accepted the post. But the rumors in Hardeman County had a different flavor, older, more bitter, as though the land itself preserved grudges. One dusk, as she locked the schoolhouse door, she found Turner waiting at the edge of the clearing. He stood silently until she approached, then nodded toward the surrounding woods. "You seen anyone watching your lessons?" he asked. She blinked. "Watch? No. Should I be concerned?" "Children talk. Men listen. Some men don't like what they hear." Marianne steadied her breath. "Are you one of those men, Mr. Turner?" A faint curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "No, ma'am. If I was, I wouldn't warn you." She studied him for a moment, sensing the strange sadness that haunted his posture. "Why look out for me?" "You teach their young ones to read," Turner replied. "Makes them dangerous to the wrong kind of folk." "And to the right kind." "Hope so." Their conversations remained brief after that, exchanged only when their paths crossed. Yet Marianne observed something others missed. Turner carried loneliness like a shadow, and beneath that loneliness lay an unspoken dread, as though he feared not the violence men might bring, but the part of himself forged to meet such violence. Marianne herself harbored fears. She feared the silence of the woods at night, the way horses in nearby barns stamped their hooves when unseen figures passed. She feared the unmarked graves she had heard whispered about, graves that did not appear on any map. But her greatest fear, one she would never confess aloud, was that the land around her might swallow her whole without leaving behind so much as a memory. Together, Turner, Silas Greeley, and Marianne Caldwell formed the fragile human core of a story already darkening at its edges. Each carried their own hopes, burdens, and secrets, pieces of a puzzle none yet understood. And as the nights grew longer, as masked riders whispered through the trees like restless spirits, as the air thickened with the promise of violence. Each would soon be forced to confront the horror that had been gathering long before any of them recognized its shape. It began with small things, tiny disturbances that might have been dismissed in any other season, in any other county. But in Hardeman, where unease clung to the air like damp smoke, each incident felt like a bead of mercury sliding towards something larger, something waiting. The first warning came to Elias Ward, the freedman who lived closest to Turner's cabin. Elias was a man of steady habits. He rose before first light, fed his mule, and checked the traps he set along the creek. But one morning he returned pale, carrying a snare that had been cut clean through. Not snapped, not broken, but sliced as if by a blade honed far past a farmer's tool. "Turner," he called as he approached the veteran's porch. "You out here?" Turner stepped from the shadows beside the cabin, hands still damp from washing at the pump. "What happened?" Elias held out the snare. "Ain't no animal done this, and there's something worse." Turner's eyes narrowed. "Show me." They walked to the creek, frost still clinging to the dead leaves. At the water's edge, Elias pointed to the mud. Turner crouched beside the prints, hoof marks, but not random. 20 or more, circling the creek bed quietly, as if the riders had moved in eerie synchronization. Elias whispered. "They watched. I could feel it. Someone was watching me." Turner traced a finger along one of the prints. These were made last night. Riders with wrapped hooves. "That's Nightriders. Or men who want to be taken for them," Turner murmured. "Either way, they wanted you to see this." Elias swallowed. "Why?" Turner rose slowly, scanning the woods. "Because you live near me." A cold silence settled between them. That same day, Marianne Caldwell noticed something peculiar at the schoolhouse. As she prepared for her lesson, she saw that the door, though locked the previous night, had been pulled open just enough to scrape the dirt floor. Inside, nothing was stolen, but the slate boards had been rearranged, pushed into a semicircle around her desk, as though some unseen audience had gathered in the dark. A single chalk line had been drawn across her Bible, neat, deliberate, bisecting the book of Exodus. When Silas Greeley arrived to check on her, a courtesy he extended more often as the tension in the county grew, she hesitated before showing him the mark. He stood in the lamplit doorway, staring at the line. "That's no child's mischief." "Who would do this?" she whispered. Silas brushed his fingers across the torn lock. "Folks with too much time and too little conscience." She stepped closer. "Deputy, I'm not a woman prone to fancies, but I've begun to feel watched on the road home. Twice in the last week, I heard men whispering in the trees. When I called out, the woods went silent." Silas swallowed hard. "Did you see anyone?" "No, nothing but shadows." He looked at her with a gentleness he rarely allowed himself. "If you hear those voices again, you ride straight to town. Don't look back." "And leave the children?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I'd rather you leave shadows than have them take you." That same evening, Turner experienced something he did not speak of until much later. As he returned from the creek at dusk, he paused near the ridge overlooking his cabin. There, perched on a low branch, hung a strip of cloth knotted into a crude circle, the kind used to mark a target during wartime. Only this one was black, and pinned to its center was a small, dead sparrow. Turner's breath thickened, not from fear, but from recognition. During the war, Confederate scouts had used similar symbols to indicate a sharpshooter in their midst. A black ring meant the shooter had marked too many men to be left alive. Someone was reminding him of the past. He removed the sparrow gently, burying it beneath fallen needles. Then he folded the cloth and carried it inside. Exhaustion dragged at him, but sleep did not come. Instead, he sat by the fire, listening to the forest breathe and shift, waiting for a sound he knew would eventually arrive. And it did. Near midnight, a slow, rhythmic tapping echoed from the north side of the cabin. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. Not the sound of a branch in the wind. A signal. One Turner had heard before in the thick of Tennessee battlefields. He rose, rifle in hand, and crept toward the window. But when he pulled the curtain aside, there was nothing. Nothing but the moonlit pines swaying in eerie unison. The next morning, footprints were found beneath that window. Silas Greeley, summoned quietly, stood over them with a grim expression. "Turner," he said, "these weren't left by men riding the county drunk. These were made by riders organized, careful, and near dared someone to track them." Turner nodded. Silas hesitated before adding, "There's talk in town that some folk been gathering again. Old names, old grudges. Sheriff won't act. Might not survive it if he did." "And you?" Turner asked. Silas looked toward the hills, his voice low. "I'm afraid, Mr. Turner. More afraid than I've ever been." Turner's reply was nearly a whisper. "Fear's a sign you still value what can be lost. Then why don't you seem afraid?" Turner stared at the dark line of trees. "Because I've already lost most things a man can lose. But if they're coming, deputy, I'll not be taken quietly." As the days passed, each person felt the creeping dread sharpen. Elias Ward's mule refused to step onto the main road at night. Marianne found another chalk mark, this time a crude circle, carved into the wood outside the schoolhouse. Silas received an anonymous note slipped under his door, bearing only 4 words: "Choose your side now." And Turner found the first torch stub near his woodpile, freshly burned, planted. A sign that the riders had stood within yards of him. A sign that this was only the beginning. Fear crept into Hardeman County the way rot takes a beam, slowly at first, silently, until the whole structure groans under the weight of what it can no longer hold. By November, even the bravest men walked the roads with their heads lowered, as though expecting a blow from the shadows. The women whispered in kitchens while tending pots of beans and cornbread, casting anxious glances toward the windows each time a horse neighed in the distance. Children stopped playing at dusk. Dogs refused to leave porches, and the woods grew too quiet, as if they, too, were holding their breath. The first direct account came from a man named Harlan Pierce, a trapper with a reputation for fearlessness. He had survived storms, floods, and a close brush with a rabid bobcat 2 winters earlier. But when he staggered into town one freezing morning, hat missing, shirt torn, eyes wild, everyone knew something unnatural had touched him. He burst into the general store, collapsing beside a barrel of dried apples, gasping for breath. "They followed me," he rasped. "God help me, they followed me all the way from the ridge." Old Mrs. Lanning set down her sewing needle. "Who followed you, Harlan?" Pierce swallowed hard. "Riders. Not men riding drunk. Not boys playing at ghosts. These were organized. Silent. They moved like—" His words caught in his throat. Silas Greeley, who had been questioning the shopkeeper about a missing wagon wheel, crossed the room. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Harlan shook his head. "Couldn't see their faces. Cloth wrapped tight. But I heard 'em. Heavy breaths behind those masks. And they had something else with 'em. Something that rattled like bones in a sack." Silas felt the blood drain from his face. "Did they say anything?" "No, just rode, slow, keeping pace with me, like they were enjoying it." Mrs. Lanning crossed herself. "Lord preserve us." Silas knelt beside Harlan. "Did you see how many?" Harlan pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. "Not sure, but more than a dozen. More than I could count with the moon behind 'em. And deputy—" "Yes?" "One of 'em. One of them held a lantern low so I could see something on his saddle horn. A strip of cloth, black, with a knot through it. Silas's mind raced. Turner's black target ring. Why show it to you? Silas asked. Harlan let out a hollow laugh. Wasn't for me. They knew I'd tell. They wanted you to know. Silas stood abruptly, his heart hammering. If the riders were leaving signs meant for Turner, and now signs meant for him, then the game had already begun. That same afternoon, Marianne Caldwell overheard her students whispering during arithmetic. They spoke of voices near the creek, of riders who circled the settlement at night, of fathers sitting awake with shotguns across their knees, and of the schoolhouse itself, believed to be marked. One boy, small for his age but brave-eyed, leaned toward Marianne when she bent near his desk. Miss Caldwell, he murmured, my mama says you ought to stop teaching us to read. She blinked in surprise. Why would she say that? 'Cause she say you're putting ideas in our heads that make bad men angry. Marianne felt the burn of tears behind her eyes, though she fought to keep her expression calm. You deserve to read, Henry. No one should fear knowledge. Henry shook his head. Mama says we should fear the men who fear knowledge. After class, Marianne stood alone in the doorway, staring out across the clearing at the tree line. Something shimmered between the branches, a flicker of movement, gone as quickly as it appeared. She pressed a hand to her chest. Not shadows, she whispered. Not this time. That night she rode to town, straight to Deputy Greeley's door. Silas answered quickly, boots half-laced, eyes weary but alert. Miss Caldwell, what's happened? I need to speak with you, she said softly. Inside, by lamplight, Marianne recounted the whispers, the strange marks, the movement in the woods. Silas listened intently, his brow deeply furrowed. They're watching the school because they see it as a threat, he said. Education threatens. I know what it threatens, she said abruptly. And I know it's not just me they're after, it's the children. Silas placed his hat on the table. I'll come by each morning. Walk the grounds with you. She hesitated. Do you think they would harm a schoolhouse? Silas's voice was heavy. They'll harm anything that changes the world they want back. A long silence stretched between them. Then Marianne spoke in a whisper. Have you spoken to Turner? Silas shook his head. Not today. You should, she said. He feels danger before the rest of us see it. Silas considered this. You trust him. She nodded slowly. If fear is the measure of trust, then yes, I trust the man who fears the right things. The next morning, Silas rode to Turner's cabin. The air was brittle, the sky bruised with approaching snow. Turner was outside chopping wood, each strike precise, rhythmic. Silas dismounted. We have trouble. Turner didn't stop cutting. I know. Silas glanced around. You saw something? 2 nights now, riders have passed the ridge behind my cabin. They ain't hiding anymore. They want me to hear 'em. Silas stepped closer. Turner, what is it they want from you? Turner paused mid-swing. The axe hung suspended in his grip. What they always wanted, he said. A reason to do what they're already hungry to do. Silas exhaled sharply. Harlan Pierce saw them showing off a black ring. Turner lowered the axe. That's a message. What message? That they remember who I am, and they want to unmake it. Silas swallowed. They're targeting you. Turner looked at him with a weariness that seemed carved into his bones. They're targeting anyone who stands between them and the past they're trying to drag back. Silas stepped forward. I won't let them burn this county to the ground. Turner's voice softened. Silas, you're one man with a badge made of tin in a place where iron hearts decide what the law is. And you're one man with a rifle. Turner's eyes darkened. That's what they fear. A rifle in the hands of a man they can't own. Before Silas could respond, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of hoofbeats. Turner stiffened. "Hear that?" Silas tensed. "They're close." They moved toward the tree line, ducking behind the brush. Through the branches, they saw 3 riders moving along the ridge. No torches, no talking, just the slow, steady rhythm of hooves. Masks covered their faces, but one rider turned just enough for the sunlight to catch a symbol stitched onto his sleeve. Silas sucked in a sharp breath. "That's the Byler family crest." Turner's jaw tightened. "Then this ain't random. Someone with land, money, influence." Silas nodded grimly. "Someone who expects the sheriff to look the other way." Turner stepped back from the brush. "If they're sending scouts, the rest ain't far behind." Silas's throat tightened. "Turner, what happened in the war that made you such a symbol?" Turner stared into the forest, eyes distant. "I survived." "That all?" "That's enough." From the ridge, one of the riders suddenly reined in his horse. He looked directly toward Turner's cabin, directly toward the spot where Silas and Turner hid. Silas froze. "Did he see us?" Turner closed his eyes. "They want us to think he saw us." The rider raised his hand, and in it hung a small object, shimmering faintly. A spent brass cartridge. Turner inhaled sharply. The rider tossed the cartridge into the air, caught it, then turned his horse and rode on. Silas's voice was barely audible. "What was that?" "A promise," Turner whispered. "And a count. They're counting something." Silas turned to him. "What?" Turner's answer chilled the air around them. "The men they plan to leave behind." By the following week, the county was a smoldering kettle of rumor and dread. The preacher's wife swore she saw riders gathering near the old Confederate cemetery. A pair of freedmen claimed they found a cross carved into their barn door, upside down. Smoke rose from distant fields at night, though no fires were reported. Dogs howled in unison for nearly an hour, one dusk, then fell silent all at once. Everyone felt the storm coming, but the first flash of lightning struck at Turner's door. It came in the form of a note, slipped beneath a log on his porch, held in place with a small stone. The handwriting was careful, elegant, not the scrawl of a common thug. Turner unfolded it. "You were the eye that hunted us in the dark. Now we are the dark that hunts you. 27 will come." Turner closed his eyes. 27. The number meant something. Something he had prayed he would never face again. Inside the cabin, the air seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment, Turner understood. The hunters were already in motion. What do you think, guilty souls cursed by God, or victims of madness? Tell us below. Your theories matter here. The snow arrived early that year, sweeping across Hardeman County with a strange, muffled stillness, as though the land wished to bury something before it could fully unfold. By the time dawn broke on the morning of the attack, every field, rooftop, and tree branch lay beneath a sheet of pale frost that shimmered like bone dust in the first light. Turner sensed the shift before he opened his eyes. It was the silence. Not the usual quiet of winter woods, but a vacuum, an absence so complete it felt as if some enormous presence waited just beyond the tree line, holding its breath. He rose from his cot, joints stiff, and stepped toward the window. The sky still wore the faint purple of pre-dawn. The pines swayed without sound, their needles heavy with ice. Nothing moved. And yet, everything felt watched. Turner reached for his rifle. He had cleaned it the night before, oiled the mechanism, checked every screw, every seam. Old habits, necessary habits. The war had taught him that danger arrived not as a roar, but as a quiet, an unnatural order imposed on the world just before chaos tore through it. He wrapped himself in his coat and stepped outside. The air was sharp enough to cut. His breath drifted in pale clouds. The forest lay frozen, expectant. Then he saw them. Not riders, not yet. Tracks. More than 24. Hoof prints pressed deep into the snow, circling the clearing like a ritual boundary. They had come in the night, stood watching him, perhaps listening to the slow rhythm of his sleep through the cabin walls. Turner's pulse steadied, not quickening in fear, settling. He crouched beside the prints, fresh, no more than 3 hours old. As he rose, he heard a crunch of snow behind him. He didn't turn. "You're up early, Deputy." Silas Greeley stepped from the trees, breath shaking in the cold. His horse was tied far back on the trail, its reins trembling in the deputy's nervous grip. "You saw them?" Silas whispered. "I see where they've been," Turner replied. Silas scanned the perimeter, eyes darting. "They circled your whole cabin. God help us, they were right here. Why didn't they strike?" Turner folded his hands over the stock of his rifle. "They're not ready yet." "How do you know?" "Because 27 men with torches don't move in silence unless they're waiting for something. They're preparing themselves." "For what?" Turner's gaze hardened. "For a killing they want remembered." Silas exhaled shakily. "Turner, what does 27 mean? You keep flinching at that number." Turner hesitated. Snow drifted from an overhead branch, breaking the silence with a soft sigh. "Before the war ended," Turner said slowly, "there was a Confederate unit known for their night raids. Men who moved without orders, self-appointed executioners. They called themselves the Regiment of Shadows, but soldiers had a different name for them." Silas swallowed. "What name?" "The 27. Silas stared at him. "27 riders? Like the note?" Turner nodded. "They took the number as their banner. 27 men, never more, never less. Each rider sworn to replace the ones who fell. Their purpose was simple. Hunt Union sharpshooters, the men who cost them too many battles." Silas's eyes widened. You were one of the sharpshooters they hunted?" Turner didn't speak for a long moment. His breath moved softly in the cold. "I took 7 of their officers at Stone's River. Never missed. They swore they'd return the favor. But the war ended," Silas whispered. Turner stared into the trees. "Not for men like them." A crow cawed overhead, startling Silas enough that he reached instinctively for his revolver. Turner watched the crow's flight until it vanished into the pale morning sky. "They're reforming," he murmured, "rebuilding what they lost. And someone with power is helping them." Silas's voice cracked. "We need to get you out of here." Turner shook his head. "I leave, they follow. And they'll burn every settlement between here and Memphis looking for me. No, they want a siege, they'll get one." Silas stepped closer. "You can't take 27 men alone." Turner finally turned toward him. "I've taken more before." Silas felt a cold pit form in his stomach. He studied Turner's face, calm, steady, resolved, and saw something beneath the surface. Not fear, not rage. Something older, a familiarity with violence he had prayed he'd never need again. Silas shivered. "Then let me stand with you." Turner's expression softened. "The sheriff won't back you. The county won't back you. And when the riders come, they'll kill any man they see by my side." Silas clenched his jaw. "Maybe so, but I'll be damned if I leave you to face this alone." Turner regarded him for a long moment, then nodded once. "We'll need help," he said. "Someone the riders don't expect. Marianne Caldwell." The schoolteacher arrived before noon, called by a messenger Silas sent quietly through the settlements. She dismounted near the cabin, her breath fogging in the crisp air, her eyes scanning the snow as though searching for the reason her name had been summoned. "What's happened?" she asked, stepping toward them. Turner showed her the hoof prints. She traced one with the toe of her boot. "There are so many." 27, Turner said. She looked up sharply. "You're certain?" "I've seen their formation before." Marianne wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "What do they want from you?" Silas and Turner exchanged a glance. Turner finally answered. "A death that means something to them." Marianne inhaled sharply. "If they come here, they'll burn everything." "Which is why you shouldn't be here," Turner said. But she stepped closer to him, chin raised. "I didn't come to flee," she said. "You called me. Tell me what you need." Her courage, quiet, stubborn, hung in the air like a lantern flame. Turner studied her face, searching for fear. There was fear, but not the kind that unravels a person. He nodded slowly. "We need knowledge. The riders talk. They leave signs. You hear children whisper things adults don't admit. I need to know what's moving in the county. Who's meeting? Who's calling themselves by old names?" Marianne closed her eyes, pressing her fingertips to her forehead. "There have been gatherings, night meetings in the Byler barn. Men whispering about restoring order. I didn't want to believe it." Silas stepped forward. "Marianne, who leads them?" She hesitated, then spoke a single name. "Ephraim Byler." Silas felt heat rise into his face. "Of course, the Bylers lost a son in the war, killed at Stones River, a sharpshooter's bullet." Marianne turned to Turner, voice trembling. Do you know anything of that?" Turner looked away. "I knew the battlefield. I didn't know the names." But something flickered in his eyes, something he didn't voice. Marianne swallowed. "Ephraim Byler has money, influence, if he's rebuilding something old." "Then the 27 ride for him," Turner said. A sudden wind whipped through the clearing, scattering powdery snow in spirals. Marianne pulled her shawl tighter, turning as if the wind carried whispers. Silas felt it too, a pressure, a presence, as though the forest itself was listening. Turner lifted his rifle. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Both of you." Silas drew his revolver. "Do you see something?" Turner didn't blink. "They're close." The three of them backed toward the cabin. Then, from the ridge beyond the clearing, a horn sounded. Low, hollow, echoing through the pines like a funeral bell. Marianne grabbed Silas's arm. "God, what is that?" Turner's answer was barely a whisper. A summons. The horn sounded again. And again. 3 long notes. Silas's voice cracked. "That a signal?" Turner nodded slowly. "As signed, the 27 have taken their positions." The forest shuddered with the sound of distant hooves. Then Turner said something that chilled the air more than winter ever could. "Tonight," he murmured, "the shadows finish what the war began." The 3 retreated into the cabin. Silas barred the door. Marianne lit the oil lamp. Turner placed his rifle on the table and began laying out ammunition with slow, precise movements. Outside, the hoofbeats drew closer. 27 men, moving as one. Marianne's breath trembled. "Turner, if they want you, why not run?" Turner looked up, eyes dark but steady. "Because running won't stop them. Standing might." She swallowed. "And if standing doesn't?" He answered quietly. "Then I'll die facing the men who think they can still unmake me." The horn sounded once more, right at the edge of the clearing. Snow drifted from the rafters. Silas whispered, "Lord, they're here." Turner gripped his rifle, his shadow stretching long across the cabin floor. He closed his eyes. "Remember," he murmured, "fear means you still have something to lose." Then the first torch ignited in the trees. A second. A third. 27 flames blooming like flowers of hell across the frozen woods. The siege had begun. If you stood in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer. The first torch flared so brightly against the snow that Marianne shielded her eyes, but Turner kept his gaze fixed on the ridgeline. The flames danced in slow, deliberate arcs as each rider raised his torch high, illuminating masks made of rough linen and sacks dusted with frost. 27 figures, arranged not in a chaotic mob, but in a perfect crescent, as if drawn from memory of some ancient ritual. Silas whispered, "Dear God, they're organized." Turner didn't reply. His breath passed through parted lips in a thin cloud. Marianne watched the stillness settle over him. Not resignation, not fear, but a cold readiness, like the moment before a trigger is pulled. The riders did not call out. They did not taunt. Instead, the three nearest dismounted and moved with a terrifying patience, pressing their torch ends into the snow, while three others stepped forward and held new flames aloft, widening the ring of fire around the clearing. Silas reached for his revolver. "They're boxing us in." "They want control," Turner said. "They want the world to believe this is an execution, not a crime." Marianne stepped back from the window. "We can't fight 27 men." Turner's voice was calm. "We don't have to fight 27. Only the one who decides when they breathe." Silas looked sharply at him. "Byler." Turner nodded once. "If he's here." From the ridge, a single rider broke formation. He guided his horse down the slope at a measured pace, each hoof sinking deep into the snow. His torch crackled softly, casting a golden glow against the mask that covered his face. But Turner noticed something the others could not: the man's posture, the way he gripped the reins not with anxiety but with ownership. This was no follower. This was a man accustomed to command. The rider halted 10 yards from the cabin. Silas ducked below the window. Marianne crouched behind the table, breath trembling. Turner stood exactly where he'd been. The rider lifted his torch higher and spoke in a voice muffled by the cloth mask. "Sharpshooter." The single word moved through the cold air like a blade. Turner didn't flinch. The rider continued, his tone steady, almost ceremonial. "You were death in the trees, death in the brush, death in the smoke. We counted our fallen. We counted 7 officers struck by a single unseen hand." Silas's eyes widened. "They know." Turner didn't move. The rider leaned forward slightly. "They called you the Eye of Stones River, a man who took aim at night and never missed, a man who thought God owed him vengeance." Turner finally spoke, voice low. "God owes no man vengeance." The rider laughed softly. "And yet you took it." Marianne felt her heart pound against her ribs. Turner didn't break eye contact with the figure outside. "What do you want?" he asked. The rider straightened. "Balance." Silas muttered under his breath. "This is madness." "Not madness," the rider said, as though he'd heard. "Memory. Memory of a war you helped end, and we intend to restore." Turner's jaw tightened. "You stand there claiming the past, but you hide your face. Cowards don't restore anything." A murmur rippled through the 27 riders. A few shifted in their saddles, but none broke formation. The lone speaker tilted his head, fearless as ever. "They said you were." Silas tugged Turner's sleeve. "Do not provoke him." But Turner stepped forward, opening the cabin door and stepping into the cold. Marianne gasped softly. Silas swore under his breath. Turner's boots sank into the snow with quiet authority. The ring of riders watched him like wolves studying a stag that refused to flee. Turner stopped halfway to the speaker. "You wrote to me," he said. "You left signs. You circled my home. Why now?" The rider raised a gloved hand, and one of the torches behind him dimmed as though responding to his will. "Because justice waits," he said, "and justice demands the same number of men taken as men delivered to death." Turner frowned. War wasn't justice. It was survival. "For you," the rider said sharply. "But not for us. Not for the families who watched our sons come home in boxes." Silas stepped onto the porch, revolver drawn. "You dare lay guilt at the feet of a man who fought for his freedom? You dare—" The rider raised a pistol in utter silence, leveling it at Silas. Marianne screamed. Turner stepped between them. "Your quarrel is with me." The rider lowered the pistol, just slightly. "Enough." Silas exhaled shakily. The rider continued. "We asked around. We learned your trade, your record, your precision. 7 of ours, undone by your hand. So we come now with 27, 4 for each life taken, and 1 to bear witness." Turner's voice dropped to something dark. "War don't tally by your rules." "Oh, but death does," the rider replied. Then he slowly removed one glove, revealing a hand scarred by burns. Turner stared. His breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition. "I know you," he whispered. The rider nodded once. "Ephraim Byler." Silas inhaled sharply. Marianne covered her mouth in shock. Byler continued. "My brother died at Stones River, but I lived. I lived to count every officer your bullet touched. And now I live to watch the land that birthed us return to its rightful shape." Turner's grip on his rifle tightened. "You build your world on blood," Turner said. "We restore our world with it," Byler replied. He gestured, and 3 riders dismounted, pulling from their saddlebags not weapons but tools, mallets, stakes, coils of rope. Marianne's heart nearly stopped. Silas staggered back. They're preparing an execution." Turner didn't move. Byler raised his voice so the forest carried it. "Sharpshooter, you stand accused of 7 counts of murder against the men of Tennessee. The Regiment of Shadows claims its due." Marianne shouted. "He was a soldier fighting for the Union. You have no right." Byler cut her off. "War ends when men say it ends. And we did not." Silas fired a warning shot into the air. "That's enough." Chaos rippled through the formation. Byler did not flinch. "Deputy Greeley, you have a choice. Stand aside or join him in the snow." Silas steadied his revolver. "You'll have to kill me to get to him." Marianne rushed forward, grabbing Silas's coat. "Stop! They'll shoot you down!" She froze, because something had changed. Something subtle. Something Turner noticed before anyone else. A faint tremor in the snow beneath their feet. A shift in the wind. A sound that was not man, horse, or torch. Turner whispered, "Do you hear that?" Byler frowned. "Hear what?" Silas dropped to a crouch. "Ground's vibrating." Marianne gasped. Is it another group?" Turner stepped back toward the cabin, eyes scanning the tree line. "No," he said, "not riders." The vibration grew. A deep, rhythmic thrum rising through the earth. The horses of the 27 stamped nervously, snorting clouds of panic into the cold air. Byler snapped, "Hold formation!" But the vibration grew stronger. Marianne clutched Silas's arm. "Turner, what is that?" Turner's voice was flat, grim, and eerily calm. "The river." Silas blinked. "What river?" "The forked deer," Turner said. "When the ice breaks." Byler scoffed. "The river is 1/2 mile." Then the first crack echoed through the forest like cannon fire. Every man froze. A second crack. A third, louder, sharper, ripping through the earth. And suddenly the woods erupted with a roar of water. A surge, barreling through the trees. Silas shouted, "Run! Run!" Byler spun in shock as the swollen winter river, freed by the sudden thaw Turner had been anticipating, tore through the lower ridge, flooding the clearing from behind the riders. "Hold your lines!" Byler screamed. But nature did not negotiate. A wall of churning, icy water slammed into the rear of the 27, ripping horses from their footing. Torches flew into snow. Riders screamed as the waters pulled them under. Marianne dropped to her knees. Silas grabbed her, dragging her back toward the cabin door. Turner didn't move. Byler's horse stumbled, buckling under the force of the flood. He clung to the saddle, mask torn away by the current. Turner raised his rifle. Not in hatred, not in vengeance, in finality. Byler's eyes locked with his. "You," Byler gasped. "You brought this?" Turner whispered. "No, you did." He fired. Byler's body fell backward into the cold surge, swept away into the roaring dark. The water receded as quickly as it had struck, leaving behind shattered branches, toppled horses, and groaning men struggling in the snow. Not all were dead, but the 27 were broken. Silas stared at Turner, chest heaving. You knew the ice was ready to break." Turner lowered his rifle. No man can stop the thaw. Marianne clung to the cabin door frame, trembling. "Is it over?" Turner looked at the wreckage, the wounded riders, the broken masks. "No," he said quietly. "The river took the 27, but the county made them, and the county still breathes." Far off, a single rider, wounded but alive, hauled himself onto a horse and fled into the trees, mask soaked and dripping. Silas cursed. "He'll tell them, all of them." Marianne whispered, "Then what happens now?" Turner stepped into the ruined clearing, snow crunching beneath his boots. "We bury the dead," he said. "We tend the wounded. We tell the truth." Silas looked up sharply. "And the county?" Turner's eyes hardened. "The county will decide whether tonight ends a war or starts another." The forest was silent once more. But this silence felt different. Not the silence before horror. The silence after it. A silence that waits to see what men will do next. By the time dawn bled across Hardeman County, the clearing resembled something more ancient than a battlefield. An archaeological wound laid bare, as if the earth itself had opened to reveal the bones of a truth long buried. Snow was smeared with mud and ash. Torn fabric from the riders' masks clung to branches like shed skins. The river water had receded, leaving behind twisted roots, shattered torches, and the dark silhouettes of horses collapsed where the surge had taken them. Silas Greeley stood at Turner's side, boots sinking into the sodden ground. He'd never seen death like this, not even in the stories passed around campfires by older veterans. This wasn't a skirmish. This was a reckoning the county had brought upon itself. Behind them, Marianne helped pull a wounded rider from beneath a tangle of branches. The man groaned softly, eyes rolling back, mask half decayed in his trembling hands. Silas knelt beside him. "Don't move, you'll make it worse." The rider swallowed, breath rattling. His voice came thin as thread. Where is Mr. Byler?" Silas did not answer. Turner looked away. Marianne placed a cloth on the man's forehead, though she knew it would not change the outcome. The wound in his side was deep. His skin already carried the waxen hue of someone drifting between worlds. The rider coughed, crimson frothing at his lips. We were told. He said we'd restore the old ways, keep what was ours." Turner crouched beside him. "The old ways took more from you than they ever gave." The man's eyes fluttered open, meeting Turner's with sudden clarity. "You're the one, the sharpshooter." "I am." The rider shuddered. I didn't want this. My brother signed me in, said we'd be protected." "Protected from what?" Silas asked. "From change," the man whispered. His breath slowed. Marianne clenched his hand gently. "Sir? Sir?" But he was already gone. Silas rose unsteadily. "We need to tell the sheriff." Turner shook his head. "And tell him what? That the Byler family raised a private army? That they tried to kill a Union veteran on his own land?" "That's exactly what we should tell him." "And what will he do?" Turner asked quietly. "He'll look at the men in this snow and see sons of landowners, cousins of councilmen, nephews of the church elders, folk he prays beside, folk who keep him in office. He'll call this tragedy. He'll call the river an act of God. He'll bury this before noon." Marianne stood, her shawl fluttering in the bitter wind. "So we do nothing?" "No," Turner said. "That river washed away their masks. Let the county see their faces. Let the truth sit where the snow can't hide it." Silas drew a slow breath. "And the survivor?" Turner looked toward the forest, where the last rider had fled. "He'll carry a story, but not the one Byler hoped." Marianne's gaze drifted to the horizon, where faint plumes of hearth smoke rose from distant cabins. "What happens when word reaches town?" Silas's expression darkened. "Panic, blame. Some will say Turner caused this. Some will say he ended something worse." Turner didn't answer. He walked to Byler's abandoned horse, its saddle twisted and drenched. A metal crest glinted on the strap, a stylized hawk holding 3 arrows. The Byler family emblem. Turner tore it free. Marianne stepped closer. "What will you do with it?" "Give it back to the family," Turner said. Silas blinked. "You're going into town." Turner nodded. "This began with them. It ends with them." The ride into Bolivar was silent, the 3 of them moving through the waking countryside like specters. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children cracked ice near wells. Women stepped onto porches, shawls tight against the cold. But as Turner rode past, conversations faltered. Doors paused half open. Faces drew tight with suspicion, fear, or something deeper, recognition of the truth beginning to stir behind them. Near the courthouse steps, the sheriff emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw Turner, Silas, and Marianne, leading 2 exhausted horses and a limp rider slumped over one of the saddles, he stopped cold. "What in God's name?" Silas dismounted. "Sheriff, we found your trouble. Or rather, it found us." The sheriff's gaze dropped to the dead rider. His face paled. That's one of the Byler boys. Jonathan's cousin." Turner tossed the metal crest at the sheriff's feet. It clattered against the wooden steps. "Your boys weren't riding alone," Turner said. The sheriff swallowed. "You're telling me?" "I'm telling you the 27 rode again last night," Turner said steadily. "And Ephraim Byler led them." The sheriff's jaw clenched. "Ephraim Byler died years ago." "He lived long enough," Turner replied, "to bring death to my door." A crowd began to gather. Merchants, farmers, church elders. Some recognized the dead rider draped across Turner's horse and gasped. Others murmured about curses and river spirits. The sheriff lifted his palms. "Folks, stand back. Let me handle this." Silas stepped forward. "Sheriff, these men weren't just riding. They came to kill. They circled Turner's cabin. They brought stakes, rope, tools for a hanging, and the river broke on them before they could finish what they came to do." A startled gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman cried, "My lord, my nephew was there last night." Turner met her eyes. "If he was, he's alive because the river showed mercy." Whispers swelled. Marianne stepped beside Turner, voice clear and unwavering. "You all know what's been happening. You've seen the Nightriders, heard the rumors, felt the fear. Now see the truth. This county is sick with secrets." The sheriff raised his hands again. "Enough. These are serious accusations. I'll not have panic spreading." Silas glared. "Panic ain't the issue. Accountability is." Turner stepped closer to the sheriff. His voice dropped, loud enough for all to hear. "Sheriff, are you going to bury this? Are you going to let the Byler name wash the blood clean?" A tense hush fell. The sheriff's throat bobbed. I have to speak with the council." Turner nodded slowly. "Then speak. But while you do, know this. The 27 came for me last night, and they failed. The river ended them. But if you let the truth die here today, more will rise." Silas added quietly, "And next time, it won't be the river waiting." The sheriff stepped back, shaken. Let me think." Marianne held Turner's sleeve. "They're afraid. All of them. But fear might move them to do what's right." Turner shook his head. "Fear alone won't save this county." Silas asked, "Then what will?" Turner looked over the growing crowd, men with faces pale in the winter light, mothers clutching their children, elders whispering old names with dread. "The truth," Turner said, "spoken aloud, written down, and passed from mouth to mouth until no man can pretend he never heard it." Marianne exhaled. "And if the county refuses to listen?" Turner mounted his horse again. "Then I'll speak louder." By midday, newspapers from Memphis arrived to interview Silas. Freedmen gathered near the schoolhouse, shaken but determined to document every detail. Even some white townsfolk, those long silenced by fear of the Bylers, stepped forward with old stories finally ready to be told. The 27 had been a ghost band for years. Now they had faces. The county began to fracture. Some wanted justice. Some wanted silence. Some wanted revenge. And into that fissure stepped Turner, Silas, and Marianne, bearing a story heavy enough to split Hardeman down its spine. Trials were demanded. Coroners called. Ministers argued whether this was the hand of God or the wrath of the river. Families arrived to identify the dead, many collapsing in tears, others hardening with cold fury. But the most haunting moment came when a young Byler widow approached Turner outside the courthouse. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Turner, my husband was with them." Turner bowed his head. "I'm sorry." She shook her head violently. "Don't be. He chose his path, but if they come back, if anyone tries to avenge him, will you stand with us? With the ones who didn't ride?" Turner met her eyes. "I'll stand with anyone who wants to end this." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She nodded, clutching her cloak tight, and disappeared into the crowd. Silas approached quietly. "You know this ain't finished." "I know," Turner murmured. "And you know some folk will still blame you." "I know that too." Marianne stepped between them, voice soft but firm. "But more will see the truth, and that matters." Turner looked toward the ridge where the river had surged. "The river took the 27, he said. But it didn't take the hatred that raised them." Silas sighed heavily. "So what now?" Turner mounted his horse once more, snow crunching beneath the hooves. "Now," he said, "we rebuild what they tried to burn." The wind carried the smell of river silt and wet pine through the streets. Hardeman County had survived the night. But the echoes of the 27 would haunt its winters for years to come. The trials began in January, when the last of the snow turned gray and granular along the edges of Bolivar's streets. Winter still clung stubbornly to the eaves of buildings and the bones of the trees, But inside the courthouse, the air crackled with something warmer. Anger, confusion, whispered vengeance, and a rising insistence that justice could not sleep through another generation. The courthouse itself was too small for the crowds pressing into it. Farmers leaned against the paneled walls, hats in hand, boots muddy from frozen fields. Freedmen filled the back rows, shoulders squared, faces lifted with the quiet defiance of people who had buried too many truths for too many years. Women clutching shawls whispered into one another's ears. Children sat on laps or the floorboards, their wide eyes reflecting the tension flowing through the room like a draft. But when Turner entered, standing tall, coat buttoned to the throat, rifle conspicuously absent, the room fell to a near supernatural stillness. It was not reverence. It was not fear. It was recognition. Whether they hated him or hailed him, every man and woman in Hardeman County knew that the events of that night circled around him like gravity around a star. Silas Greeley followed behind, carrying a satchel filled with written statements. Marianne Caldwell slipped into the gallery quietly, face composed, hands clasped in front of her. The sheriff sat at the bench with an expression that hovered between dread and determination. Judge Alastair Whitcomb banged his gavel. These proceedings will come to order. We gather to address the matter of the Nightriders found deceased or injured on the 6th night of December, 1875, as well as the alleged involvement of the Byler family. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge raised a hand. We will have quiet. No one believed they would get it. The first witness called was Silas Greeley. He stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. Your Honor, I witnessed the riders surround Mr. Turner's cabin. I observed the tools they carried, stakes, rope, mallets, tools that speak to an intended execution. The judge peered over his spectacles. Deputy, are you suggesting these men planned a lynching? I'm stating it outright, Silas replied. Gasps punctuated the air. Turner's eyes lowered, but his posture remained unshaken. And Mr. Turner? The judge asked. Did he provoke these men? Fire upon them first? Silas's jaw tightened. No, sir. The river struck before any shot was fired from within that cabin. The only shot made by Mr. Turner was against Ephraim Byler, after the flood hit, and only when Byler reached for a weapon. The gallery erupted. Some men shouted that Turner was a murderer. Others shouted back that Byler had brought murder to Turner's door. The judge thundered for silence, striking the gavel until the echoes bounced like gunshots. When the room settled, Silas continued. Your Honor, what happened wasn't war, but it wasn't an act of malice by Mr. Turner. It was survival. Survival, someone muttered bitterly. For him, maybe. For all of us, another replied. The judge dismissed Silas with a nod. Marianne Caldwell was called next. She stepped into the witness stand with a steady grace, though Turner sensed the tremor beneath her calm. The judge regarded her kindly. Miss Caldwell, you were present during these events? Yes, Your Honor. And you can speak to the intentions of the riders. Marianne turned slowly toward the gallery, her voice clear. I can speak to the fear they caused among my students. I can speak to the chalk marks on my schoolhouse. I can speak to the men in masks who rode at night, who watched the children as they walked home. A tense silence spread across the room. I saw the tools they carried that night, she continued, and I saw the formation they rode in. This was not a frightened crowd. It was an organized force. The judge leaned back. In your estimation, Miss Caldwell, were these men acting to uphold the law or to defy it? Marianne's answer came without hesitation. They were acting as if they believed they were the law. Listen. Several women gasped. A few men nodded solemnly. Turner felt a heaviness lift slightly at her courage, an acknowledgement that truth, once spoken in such company, could not be forced back into silence. When Marianne stepped down, the courtroom seemed to exhale. Then the final witness was called. Isaiah Turner. Turner rose. The room shifted like a single living creature, murmuring, tensing, bracing. He walked with quiet authority, boots tapping rhythmically against the wooden floor. The judge regarded him with a mixture of respect and unease. "Mr. Turner," the judge began, "your testimony may determine the future of this county. Speak clearly." Turner nodded. "I aim to." He faced the gallery, not the judge. "I fought in the war," he said simply. "I did what was asked of me, and yes, I took lives. But no man here has the right to judge what he never stood witness to." Whispers rose. Turner continued, "I returned to these hills not as an enemy to anyone. I built a cabin. I worked my land. I kept to myself. But the war didn't end for everyone." He reached into his coat and withdrew the folded note given to him by the 27, the one that read, "Owed in blood." He held it up. "This is what they left on my doorstep." The judge motioned for the bailiff to retrieve it. When the paper reached his hands, he read it, his expression tightening. Turner spoke louder now. "The men who came that night weren't strangers. They were sons of this county, men protected by names carved into the courthouse walls. They wore masks not to hide from justice, but to hide justice from you." A low rumble swept the gallery. "Some of you know this," Turner said, eyes shifting over the crowd. "Some of you feared these riders. Some of you turned your heads. And some of you," he hesitated, voice darkening, "some of you believed in what they did." A few men looked at the floor, others glared. "And now," Turner continued, "you must decide whether what happened in those woods was a calamity or a correction." Silas watched him in awe. Marianne felt tears sting the corners of her eyes. Turner finished with a steady breath. "I didn't kill 27 men. The river did. The river broke because winter couldn't hold forever. Neither can secrets." His last words hung in the air like frost. The judge dismissed him gently, but Turner's testimony echoed through the room long after he stepped down. The trial stretched for days. Families arrived with lawyers. Church elders pleaded for leniency. Freedmen demanded accountability. The sheriff fumbled between pressure and principle. And reporters from Memphis and Jackson scribbled so fast their pencils snapped. In the end, the verdict was not dramatic. It was quiet, reluctant, but real. The county formally condemned the formation of the 27 as an unlawful paramilitary group. Surviving riders were sentenced to varying prison terms. The Byler estate forfeited land to pay reparations. And, most unexpected of all, the court declared Turner's actions justified under the law of self-defense. It should have felt like victory. But Turner knew better. For every rider convicted, 2 replaced him in angry whispers. For every freedman who felt safer, another felt the danger tightening into something harder and more invisible. The county was changed, but not cured. In the weeks that followed, newspapers printed Turner's story from Kentucky to New Orleans. Some called him a hero. Some called him a menace. Some called him a symbol of a country still learning how to walk after tearing itself apart. But for those in Hardeman County, the aftermath was far more intimate. At the schoolhouse, parents allowed their children to return, tentatively at first, then with greater trust, as word spread that the riders were scattered and the Byler name no longer commanded the same shadowed authority. At the sheriff's office, men finally came forward about their own encounters with masked riders, attacks they'd been too afraid to speak of. At the church, some families sat on opposite sides of the aisle, refusing to look at one another, bitterness dripping from every bowed head during prayer. And Turner rebuilt his cabin in silence. One morning, Marianne approached him with a basket of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. "You haven't visited town," she said. Turner hammered a new beam into place. "Town's had enough of me for a while." She stepped closer. "But not all of them. Not the ones who see clearly." "Even so," Turner murmured, "I'm tired of being the reason men choose sides." Marianne set the basket down gently. "You're not the reason, Mr. Turner. You're just the truth they've been trying to ignore." He finally looked at her. "Truth comes at a cost," he said. "It always has," she replied softly. "But so does silence." Turner's gaze drifted to the ridge, the place where 27 torches once burned like stars falling from the sky. Silas arrived moments later, hat tucked against the wind. Town council's talking about forming a real patrol. No more Nightriders, no more secret groups. Turner raised an eyebrow. "And who'll join it?" Silas shrugged. "Maybe men tired of burying their neighbors." Turner offered a faint, weary smile. "That'd be a start?" Silas hesitated. "And you? What will you do now?" Turner tapped the wooden beam. "Same as I've always done. Build what can be built, guard what can be guarded." Marianne looked between the two men. "And if the past comes back again?" Turner's eyes hardened, not with fear, but with resolve. "Then the county will stand with me," he said, "or it'll bury itself." A cold wind lifted the last of the dead leaves from the forest floor, carrying them west toward the river. Hardeman County was healing. Slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Turner, Silas, and Marianne stood together at the edge of the clearing, three figures bound by a night that would be spoken of for decades, taught in schools, whispered around fires, and carved into the uncertain memory of a nation. Because the story of the 27 was not just about violence. It was about the shadow a war casts long after the guns go silent. It was about the power of truth to break through snow and darkness. And it was about a man who refused to run from the past, even when the past rode toward him with 27 torches burning in the night. So what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled, or was it buried to protect the powerful? Write your theory in the comments. If you want us to keep digging into America's darkest history, like this video and subscribe for next week's story.